Thank you, everybody. Chasing daylight. We are all chasing daylight. If a human life could be illustrated with the sun and the hours in a day, then we're all chasing daylight. The sun rises at our birth, and the sun sets the day we die. On a long enough timeline, all of our survival rate is 0. I don't know about you, did you ever have a moment in your life where you recognized, I am going to die someday? Maybe I'm weird for asking that question, and maybe me even sharing with you the moment. I feel like recalling that is a bit weird, but maybe there's a few of us here tonight that can relate. I remember being in the 5th grade. I really didn't experience any real death that I could remember. My grandpa Perillo had passed away when I was young, and I have some pretty decent memories I can recall, even back to being in a crib, which some people might be a little sus about that, but I feel like I can remember them pretty well. But I do have a couple memories of my grandpa Perillo before he passed. He passed before I was age 5. And I remember those conversations around he's with God and angels up in heaven, and I kind of recall some of those conversations I had with my babysitter while my mom and dad were at the viewing. But I just remember being in the 5th grade, and it was summer. I remember it being really warm, and just like most nights in my life, I was laying on my pillow, not being able to fall asleep quite as quick as I'd like, because I just have never been a great sleeper. And I just remember being in 5th grade and going, I'm going to die someday. One day I'm going to take my last breath. I wonder what that day will be like. I wonder how it will happen. And I just remember thinking about that life has a temporary kind of feel to it. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the writer, which most scholars assume is Solomon, but the writer nonetheless is talking about kind of this view of life being temporary. And so what do you live for? And Ecclesiastes is him looking at life and seeing how life at times is unfair. Life at times doesn't necessarily bring enjoyment. And he talks about things not worth living for, and of course he goes on quite the journey. But he says this kind of in the middle of, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he says this in Ecclesiastes 3:11. He says he's referring to God, has made everything beautiful in its time. Other translations would say God has made everything with purpose in its time, that everything has this level of value or meaning in terms of God's plan. It says, He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. An interesting verse for those of us that look to explain how God did everything, what God does, how God's ways are, what God's will is. All of that, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning times, the end times. But in there is this idea of God has set eternity in the human heart, even though the human heart can't fully understand that concept. So it's interesting, right? The writer of Ecclesiastes is like, man, life is short. Life is quick. It's not always fair. It doesn't always make sense. But also, I've got this longing in my heart for this idea of eternity. And Ecclesiastes says that comes from God, that God gives you, whispers eternity into your ear, even though you can't fully understand what that means. I also find it interesting, the war on eternity. The war on eternity. From those maybe that are against the Creator, or the idea of the kingdom of God, maybe those who adopt, again, a worldview of atheism or being an agnostic. And so it's interesting, there was a show called The Good Place, and while I haven't really seen much of it, I know part of embedded in that is the idea of being forever somewhere, and whether where these people is actually hell or if it's heaven. But they conclude that they think eternity in general to exist anywhere forever, whether that's referred to paradise or not, is kind of a form of torture and is cruel. And so then you have atheists now who would say, I don't even want there to be an eternity. I think that actually would be cruel. And again, in many ways, that's just kind of Romans, what it says in Romans, that the human mind and the human heart is against or at odds with God. In a lot of ways, that's just another indicator of the creation at times warring against the Creator. But you and I, we have decisions, right? We have 41 million minutes. We talked about that in week 1 of this series, and we get to decide what we want to do with some of those minutes. Maybe we can't decide all of those, and of course, you do sleep a third of your life or so, or whatever that looks like, but you get to decide, at least at some points in your life, how you want to spend those minutes and what you want to do in those minutes and what is valuable and meaning. And the writer in Psalm says this, teach us, talking to God, to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so embedded in this verse is, there's a wise way to spend your days, and there's an unwise way to spend your days. There's a life that can be summed up by a wise life, and a life that could perhaps be summed up by a foolish or a wasted life. We use that word sometimes, don't we? Even people who aren't necessarily spiritual would go, oh, whether it's because of tragedy or whether some really bad decisions, oh, that was a wasted life. That was a wasted life because they had to go to war for this reason. Or that was a wasted life because of some of the decisions that this person made and that resulted in tragedy. But we use that term. But you and I, we can live in such a way where we live a life that could be summed up by a life led with wisdom, that we spent our time and the decisions we made. And that's what chasing daylight is about. Is if everybody's chasing daylight, what is the most important things? What is truly worth living for? Again, the writer in Ecclesiastes says, so much is vanity. So much doesn't matter. So many things in your life that you care about or worry about don't even make it into eternity. Like you care about them and worry about them now at like age 20, but by age 30, you're not even going to be thinking about any of those things. They don't even last a decade. Some don't even last 6 months. Some of us, we are so broken about a relationship that we think, I could never move on. That feeling, that initial feeling when a relationship is broken is, I don't know how I'll ever get past this. Yet 6 months, maybe a year or so, you're like, okay, like I can imagine my life now apart from that person or that relationship. Or maybe that's even with, I don't know, a program that you thought you should finish, or a career that you're struggling to get into, or a career you were into and you are no longer. So many of the things we worry about don't even come close to entering eternity. They barely last a year or two. We don't even think about them a decade from now. We've talked about this idea of divine moments. And I want to propose something to you tonight as we look at some narratives together, and maybe we can glean some things from the Scripture. I want to go more narrative tonight. It's probably not my bent every week, and probably more weeks than not I look at instruction. I look at perhaps instruction that comes from either Jesus' mouth or from like the letters from Paul, and this is how you live. This is instruction on how to live your faith in a real meaningful way with the person of Jesus Christ. But tonight, I thought maybe we'd look at some stories and see what we can learn from it. But I want to propose this to you tonight, and that's, if we talk about this idea of divine moments, God God who's numbered your life and your days, I think, appoints those. So I want to propose this to you, that divine appointments will lead you to divine moments, and it's in those divine moments where you'll find your most meaningful time in your life, where you'll find the meaning that your heart longs for. And I think even if you find yourself in a season of apathy and you're struggling to care about much, and you're just getting up and you're just doing a routine because it's just what you're supposed to do, but you're really struggling with meaning in your life, I do think that there is something that resides in your soul, and it comes from God, and that you have this craving, this soul craving of meaning in your life. But I believe divine appointments lead you to divine moments, and I would propose that there are most definitely divine appointments in your life. That you weren't made by accident. You're not just it's not just random that you are here in this time and space. That there is the Creator. You were created in the Creator's image, and God has works and meaning and appointments for you. But quite often, you and I, we miss those. Or at times, maybe I'd say, we miss those. And at times, we look back at the last 3 months or the last 6 months of our life, and we say, oh my gosh, did I do anything really meaningful? Did I really step into something that matters? If I have eternity, this longing, this eternity that resides in my heart, have I stepped into anything that's related to that? And so I want to say that there are opportunities, and I want to look at some examples of those, but I want to say it this way. There are opportunities in your life to sacrificially love like Jesus and radically trust Jesus at the same time. To both mimic Jesus, the Savior of your soul, but also in the meantime, while you're mimicking him, you have to fully trust, because it's beyond you. It's maybe beyond your scope, beyond your capacity, beyond what you thought maybe even you can handle. I want to look at some things that stand in the way of you and I stepping into divine appointments that lead to divine moments in our life that maybe would lead us towards that meaning that our souls crave. And I just want to look at some narratives. I want to look at some stories. I want to look at one in the Old Testament and a couple, obviously, around Jesus, because that's a great place to go to always. But I wanted to go and look at Jonathan in the book of 1 Samuel. And so I'm going to read. It's going to be a bit lengthy. Some of it, perhaps, is a bit wordy. I'm going to read through, I'm going to cruise through it, and then I'm going to summarize kind of what's happening in this passage, because I do think it is absolutely relatable to your life and to even mine. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree. That sounds delicious. In Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod, which is basically, he is the spiritual advisor in this context. He was son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost, these are the enemies of the people of Israel, was a cliff, right? So that makes it's narrow. Go too far one way or the other, you're going to fall to your death. One was called Bozez, the other Senna. One cliff stood to the north towards Michmash. That's fun. The other to the south towards Geba. Yeah, you know exactly where that is. Me too. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." "Do all that you have in mind," his armor-bearer said. "Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul." Jonathan said, "Come on then. We will cross over toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they are hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, "Come up to us, and we'll teach you a lesson." Wow, that sounds like elementary school. So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." I just stopped there because I already felt like it was wordy enough. But Jonathan asked for that sign. He saw that sign. And so he did step up. And between Jonathan and his armor-bearer, they got victory, which changed the course of a war that the Philistines were waging on the people of Israel. But I want to back up there because I just want to give you some context. We have a man named Jonathan. He is the king's son. The king is Saul at the time. Now here's what's interesting. The prophet Samuel has already declared to Saul that he has lost the favor of God. And so while he still has his position, he is no longer operating under God's power. Important to remember that because people can hold on to positions in this world. And maybe some of those positions have maybe some moral or spiritual connotations to them, but that does not necessarily mean that they're operating under the power or with the power of God. Saul was definitely in this case. Now, the reason why the Israelites find themselves in such a predicament is Jonathan and the king are the only ones who have any kind of weapons. So we see that if you back up into the previous chapter, that they are out of weapons. So typically when you're waging war on another people group or another nation, if you can really limit certain supplies, that is going to probably force them to surrender at some point. So if you're thinking about food, if you cut off the food supply, or in this case, we're talking about weapons. So there's only 2 men out of all of those men that have weapons. Now Jonathan's got weapons, and then he's got his young armor bearer, and then Saul has his weapons, and everybody is just simply stuck in the moment, and they have no idea what to do. Saul's sitting there. He's clearly not hearing from God anymore. But interestingly enough, those backing him, right, the priest or the spiritual advisor that's with him, not giving him any advice, any counsel. Hey, this is what God's leading us to do. Zero. Important for us to realize that religious people don't always hear the voice of God clearly. We should not necessarily just think about that in terms of other people. We should just think about that in terms of us. Just because I've been in a rhythm of showing up to religious activities or showing up doesn't always equate to me listening to and actually hearing the voice of God. And then the second part to that, of course, is doing what the voice of God is calling you to do, because at times that includes sacrificing, sacrificial love, and sacrificial trust, and giving of yourself. And at times that means you and I doing something that not only is hard to do, but simply something we don't want to do. What's interesting is Jonathan doesn't find a little extra encouragement from somebody who is bigger, wiser, more experienced. He finds the young armor bearer, right? It's the young armor bearer that says, "Listen, I'm with you, heart and soul." But it is good to have that, is it not? To have someone in your life who you can talk to, who supports you on that level, where they say, "Listen, I'm with you and I'm for you, and regardless of where you land in your life, if you land on your face and look like a fool, if you're considered by the world a failure, guess what? I am with you." And it's great to have a relationship like that. It talks about the importance of having relationships like that. I talk about this when I talk about friendships, and this isn't a friendship message. But man, the people you're closest to should be people who are for you. Aren't just with you because of what you do or what you have or what you can accomplish or what you bring to the relationship, but just people who love and care and want to support you. I mean, the armor bearer puts his life on the line. Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul. What's also interesting is everybody celebrates after this happens. Those two defeat 20 men, right? We're talking about an armor bearer and one single man, and that shook the Philistine army. Mostly because they didn't recognize the fighting skills of Jonathan. They recognized the power of God with the people of Israel. And that turned the war. That turned the battle. And I would argue that some of your most successful moments in your life won't just point to your glory, they'll point to the glory of God. And that's what I loved about being in Nashville last month. Listen, I went to a passion conference, and me and a group of my peers came back and went vintage to do something to fight against human trafficking. I didn't know what I didn't know what we should do, One of the guys came up with, we should put a change for change thing out and people can drop change in. And it evolved because of so many different people's creativity, and we raised all these funds, and we're raising all these funds now. And what was so cool about sitting in a room, and I felt so humbled, but what was so cool is I was talking about the faith and work of so many other people outside of myself. Because half of it, I didn't even really know what I was doing, right? It was kind of God working through creativity and events and people giving sacrificially and people caring about this in our community, but I couldn't force anybody to do that. I couldn't talk anybody into doing that. And I know sometimes you and I, we talk about this idea of having an impact on the world, and that just seems so big, so far beyond our little scope. I just feel like stepping into that conference, I was just like, all I did was just put my simple yes on the table of like, I think we should do something like this. And then 10 years later, here we are. Over 10 years, 11 years later, here we are. Of a campaign that has raised a number of things to help an organization that's fighting against a very real evil. I'm not a fundraiser. I don't know how to put together a room of millionaires and get them to write checks. I was just part of a group of people that said, yeah, I'm going to give some time in the spring. I'm going to invest in this. And I'm going to give sacrificially myself, no matter what that looks like. But sometimes I think we're like many of the men in this situation. We're simply paralyzed by fear. We're afraid we're going to fail, so we choose to do nothing. I feel like our social climate easily feel that way. We can easily fall into that trap. And I don't want to step out too far, because if I do that, then I might fail. Or I might cause harm to myself. Or I might look stupid or be embarrassed. So many times we're paralyzed by fear, and we not only don't step into something, we just simply sit there and wait. Who knows how long they would have sat if Jonathan didn't say, hey, we got to move, we got to do something. Sometimes we don't step into our divine appointments just simply because we're just paralyzed by fear. Oh man, maybe I should have this conversation with a friend or a coworker, but I'm just afraid of what this might look like. If they think I have a level of faith like this, they might think I'm blank. They might think I'm crazy. They might think I'm in a cult. They might think, you fill in the blank. They might think I'm self-righteous. Man, imagine if we stepped outside of that fear and just said, man, God, I'm going to look for a sign. I'm just going to say something that brings a little bit of hope or a little bit of encouragement to someone, or simply say, I care, and part of my caring is praying for you. And so I just want to say, you don't have to share anything else. I just want you to know that I pray, and you're in my prayers. Now, of course, in that statement means you and I actually have a prayer life, right? We have an active prayer life, and we engage in that spiritual activity. Let's look to a story about Jesus. This one's a fun one for me. It's found in Luke chapter 8. One day Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side of the lake. So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he, Jesus, fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and he rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. Where is your faith? What a question. What a question. Jesus asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." This is Jesus. He's hustling for 3.5 years. I mean, as you even see in the next narrative, he's always surrounded by people. People need from him. They either want to hear his words of authority. They either want his powers in terms of healing. Everybody wants from Jesus, right? So he's in the boat. He's with his students, right? His disciples. And of course, we know that Jesus is fully human and fully God, and this is a great example of it. Why? Because Jesus is tired. He wants to get some Z's. And so he's asleep in the boat, and the waters are raging. And all the disciples are freaking out. But Jesus isn't. A couple of things here. When you and I freak out, always great to remember, there is one being that does not freak out, that never freaks out. And that's God. That's Jesus, right? Not freaking out at all. Another thing we see in this is how many times you and I are in the middle of a storm, in the middle of tough times, in the middle of difficult circumstances, and we feel like God's sleeping on us. And God, why haven't you showed up yet? God, why haven't you taken care of this storm yet? God, why haven't you fixed this situation? If you're the God who is about restoration, if you're the God who is about goodness and justice, why haven't you stepped into this situation? Why are you sleeping on me, God? I wonder how many times you and I are praying against or avoiding the storm we're in. Because you and I, we like it easy. We like it convenient. We like when we don't have to trust in anything other than ourselves. But that's not faith. That's not faith. Right? Think about the story of Job. When Satan says, "Oh, he only loves you because his life's easy." And God says, "All right, Satan, go ahead. Test him. Try him." But how many times have you and I prayed against or are looking to avoid the storm or the difficult times, but is the divine appointment in the difficult situation? And you and I don't want to step into the storm, therefore we won't step into that divine appointment. Maybe it's your faith that God wants to build up in your heart and in your life that can take you into the storm, where God wants to use you in a most meaningful way. I can't help but think of a number of those in my own life, and anyone who's heard me speak for some time probably has already heard this, but I would have never, ever signed up to have neck issues that would affect me both neurologically. I was never a good sleeper to begin with and affect my sleep even more. I would never have wanted to walk through a journey of trying to decide if I want to get a neck surgery. I mean, in some ways it's like Jack Eichel. Other ways, definitely not like Jack. But I'm having this hard decision of you've tried every treatment. The only other possibility for you that has potential risk is fusing your neck, is doing a 2-level neck fusion. I was like, I never thought I'd be hearing this at my age. I thought maybe I'd be worrying about that down the road. But in that whole kind of process of before and deciding if I'm going to take the risk of getting the surgery, and is my quality of life going to be worse or better? Am I going to be able to do anything? I can do some things right now, but when it gets bad, it's bad for a week or two. Processing all of that. Going through the surgery, and then God literally putting me on a recliner chair for months being able to do very little. But God speaking to me in a meaningful way about a number of things, whether that was the loss of my dad, I was trusting him in other situations. I would have never signed up for that. I would have never wanted that trial. I would have never wanted that storm. I would have avoided that at all costs. But it was in that where God taught me a number of things. And then, as always, it's crazy. I was working here, and I got it at the end of 2016, and I stepped back into my role here at church. Was slightly different back then in the beginning of 2017, and on a Sunday, I oversaw our welcome center and part of our connection stuff. I just so happened to have a conversation with someone who was having neck issues and was just heard from a doctor that maybe they'd recommend a surgery. Right? I mean, my first Sunday back at work. Sunday was a work day for me here at church, and I'm having a conversation like that. And I'm not even fully healed yet. It took me 15 months. But in that, like, wow, okay. God's already using this. God's already working through this. So maybe that storm that you're just continuing to want to pray against or avoid, maybe God wants you to step into it, because stepping into that, you'd step into your divine appointment, which would lead you to maybe a meaningful divine moment in your life. But you and I, we always want it to be easy, and we always avoid difficult situations when we can. Last one. Jesus is walking. Christina referenced this last week, this story. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. But no one could heal her. In your study Bible, it'll say she spent all that she had on doctors, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. You're basically being crushed by so many people, and you're asking this question?" But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he had said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." In a lot of ways, the woman who had the issue of blood was an inconvenience. Certainly was an inconvenience to his disciples. So clearly there was some sort of schedule and itinerary, and the disciples felt like it was their job to continue to keep this thing moving. Maybe almost like a tour manager, right? And who knows who that could have been, one of the 12, but maybe it was a couple of the guys. But think about it. I mean, it's bananas in Jesus' life, because it says Jesus returns and a crowd welcomes him, right? And so what does that mean? What happens when the crowds gathered? They wanted him to talk. So he was actually supposed to be teaching, but then this crowd just gets so crazy, and then while he's looking to teach, right? Jairus comes up. I need you. My daughter is dying. Right? You've got to come, right? And as we see later in, Jesus does not show up in time. He doesn't get to a sick girl. He gets to a dead girl, right? Now, he flexes a bit, and he raises her from the dead, right? Remember, he's there, and there's people who were there that were paid to cry. That's what they did at funerals. They were literally paid to cry. They didn't even know people or care. They just cried. And Jesus is like, "What are you crying?" They're sleeping. And then what's funny is you can tell they were fake crying because they just immediately start laughing. Unless you're faking crying, you can't just immediately start laughing at somebody, right? It just goes to show you. Sometimes people show up to important moments in your life and they aren't feeling quite what they say they're feeling. But anyways, that's a side note, right? He wants to teach. Jairus wants his daughter healed. And then this lady, right? And again, some would even ask, who's more important, a dying girl or an older woman who's been dealing with an issue for quite some time? Who is more important? And of course, Jesus is like, don't worry, I've got this. There is value all around. but he stops. And I just love this story because this doesn't fit in some of the systematic theological boxes that some people really like, right? Jesus never taught, hey, touch my clothes and get some power, right? Jesus never said, hey, touch this cloth and get some power. No. Some televangelists who are fake, right, who are beyond fake, they do that stuff. Jesus never taught that. Right? And we never really see that, right? We never see Jesus working that way, like, oh man, he's surging with power, like he's in the Marvel universe, and someone just takes a little bit, like, ooh, we got a little bit of a pinky share of his power, right? Which again goes to show you that God doesn't always work in the cookie cutter way that we think. Now, I'm not saying God doesn't stay consistent with what God values and the order of God and what is right and what is wrong. I'm just saying some of us think, well, God only works in this way. Maybe not. He stops. He pauses. He's like, I want to see who this woman is. And his disciples are like, what are you talking about? Everybody is touching you. You're getting crushed. He says, she's here somewhere. So, of course, my question to you is, do you ever allow yourself to be inconvenienced so that you can step into a divine appointment? So many of us just love to fill up our schedules. And so many of the things that our schedules are filled up with aren't really that important. But we just never want to be inconvenienced. I remember I was driving home one night and it was kind of late, and I had someone in the car and I saw somebody walking down the road, and I could tell, I just could tell from where I grew up. I was like, this person's been walking for a while. And so I looked at the person in my car and I asked him, I was like, do you care if I, turn around and offer this guy a ride? Because one, if you do, I will bring you to my house real quick if you're nervous about your safety, and or two, if you're nervous, you got some stuff on you that we could get robbed or something. And he's like, yeah, maybe we should stop at your house real quick. I want to unload a few things. I'm like, okay. And I ended up picking some guy. He wasn't in the best mental state. He was, a bit inebriated, but he had had a long night, gotten into a bad fight with his girlfriend, and was walking, and had been walking for a couple hours, and was somewhere close to South Buffalo, and still had some ways to go. And I was like, come on, man, hop in. I'll give you a ride. Sometimes I wonder if there's people who have needs that are quote-unquote on the side of the road, but our life is just, I got to get to my destination, right? I got to just keep to my schedule. I just got to get through the season of my life. I just got to stay busy this way, and there's people on the side of the road, and it's an inconvenience. It might cost you a little bit extra gas, and that's expensive right now, but Lord willing, and it's supposed to be 25 cents cheaper a gallon in a couple days, at least allegedly that's what they say. It'll cost you some of your time. And again, you might be in a situation now, I'm not necessarily saying this fully literal, and I don't know that I would advise any single females here to just go pick up people on the side of the road, so don't hear it that way. I was more using it as an illustration in terms of your life is a highway, like cars, and do you ever allow yourself time, or would you ever consider pausing your schedule or all that you wanted to accomplish in your day? I'm an Enneagram 3 achiever, so it's tough for me. Would you ever inconvenience yourself in your schedule? Because maybe in that is some divine appointment that would lead to a divine moment. Because I would kind of view it like this. Maybe you'd have a spiritual conversation, and that spiritual conversation would lead them either into a type of trust in God, or lead them down a path that led them to Jesus. And you can't tell me that that is not something that will be talked about again and again and again in the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to close it like this as we're running out of time. Divine appointments will often be unexpected needs that arise at inconvenient times. Divine appointments will often be unexpected needs that arise at inconvenient times. I don't know about you, but sometimes, even myself, sometimes I wonder how many opportunities I miss just because I sit in whatever routine my season gives me. And I'm a routine person. I enjoy routine. But I wonder if God's trying to poke at my heart, to push me towards something that is outside of myself, that is outside of the brevity of this life, because he set eternity on the hearts of people. If you would, please pray with me.